This is Travis Wayne Goodsell, and as promised, I'm starting the translation of the brass plates in a video form, rather than doing it on a document and posting the pictures of the documents as I go along. We'll also do a vlog of the process. That should help correct any errors that I make. It'll also make sure that I get all the necessary scenes that are required for the book, and so it should work all the way around. This is more for editing purposes, that you then can see the process of how translation works. And we're starting here with the introduction. The brass plates, as referred to in the Book of Mormon of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, translated from ancient Egyptian documents and glyphs by Travis Wayne Goodsell. And yeah, I need to remember to change the date when this is all finished. I was anticipating the 14th of February, but too much has come up to interfere with that. I then have a dedicatory page to my children who are no longer with me. Alright, as a side note, I put in here that Amazon requires a minimum charge price to sell on their site, and as an 8.5 by 11 inch publication with color pictures, it will be of such a high price to you, the customer, as I would get a minimal royalty. Turning this into a Kindle version would require lots of changes, such that it would be a completely different book. I will instead offer a digital PDF version on my website for next to nothing, if not for free, along with an audio version. I'll redo the whole thing after I finish the book and make a one big long video. If necessary, most likely I'll have to do it in a series, and I'll just convert it to an audio format. Okay. I need to add something to the introduction. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do about that. I think I'll just go to the next picture and then we'll add it in as I go through that. Alright, the introduction. I went and typed in the added information, so I'll just read it as I typed it. And if I need to make editings, I'll do that as I go along. But I tried to save time and space on the video to type it out first before I started. Alright, introduction. Our current languages in the world are alphabetical, but before the invention of the alphabet language was language was through picture representation. Such a language is visual, not auditory. Those writing and those reading a visual language will have images appear in their minds of the real objects represented in sign form. People debate over whether a book or a movie is more educational, yet any form of communication, when properly represented, is informative. A person who knows how to use the words of their language effectively can inspire and help the reader or listener visualize what is being said. Whereas a movie takes away takes away our mind's necessity to create the imagery as the author's visual representation is played out by the characters' interpretations of the role they play. Such a process is also inspiring and educational, just in a different manner. It is said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. With ancient Egyptian glyphs, it may actually be more like 1,000 understandings. In 2016, I spoke with my local bishop about an idea to save the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints upwards of $1 billion. My bishop immediately shut me down by telling me I'm not in the position to recommend ideas to prophets. In 2000, I spoke with the supervisor of the church's curriculum department about getting Joseph Smith's King Follett Sermons translation of Genesis 1:1 from the biblical Hebrew text into the footnotes of scriptures. He told me that it would never be done until I became the church president. In Matthew, Jesus changes the name of Simon to Seer, which is the translation of the Egyptian word Peter, and then tells him he is to receive the keys of the kingdom. From Matthew chapter 16, verses 17 through 19. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. In the Book of Mormon, there is the story of Ammon talking to King Limhi about King Mosiah, who is a seer who can translate ancient records. From Mosiah, chapter 8, verses 13 through 18. Now Ammon said unto him, I can assuredly tell thee, O king, of a man that can translate the records, for he has wherewith that he can look and translate all records that are of an ancient date. And it is a gift from God, and the things are called interpreters, and no man can look in them except he be commanded, lest he should look for that he ought not, and he should perish. And whosoever is commanded to look in them, the same is called seer. And behold, the king of the people who are in the land of Zarahemla is the man that is commanded to do these things, and who has the high gift from God. And the king said that a seer is greater than a prophet. And Ammon said that a seer is a revelator and a prophet also, and a gift which is greater can no man have, except he should possess the power of God, which no man can, yet a man may have great power given him from God. But a seer can know of things which are past, and also of things which are to come, and by them shall all things be revealed. Or rather, shall secret things be made manifest, and hidden things shall come to light, and things which are not known shall be made known by them, and also things shall be made known by them which otherwise could not be known. Thus God hath provided a means that man, through faith, might work mighty miracles. Therefore he becometh a great benefit to his fellow beings. Joseph Smith referred to himself as a prophet, seer, revelator, and translator. In Doctrine and Covenants, section 124, verse 125, I give unto you my servant Joseph, to be a presiding elder over all my church, to be a translator, a revelator, a seer, and a prophet. Then Joseph Smith referred to legitimate church president successors as being the same status. From Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, verses 91 to 92. And again, the duty of the president of the office of the high priesthood is to preside over the whole church, and to be like unto Moses. Behold, here is wisdom, yea, to be a seer, a revelator, a translator, and a prophet, having all the gifts of God, which he bestows upon the head of the church. So if translation is a key of the kingdom or priesthood, which only a seer can use, who gave Joseph Smith the key of translation before getting the keys of the priesthood in the Kirtland Temple? You gotta go to the next. Okay. We're gonna have to bump that down to the next page. All right. From Doctrine and Covenants, section 110, verses 11 through 16. After this vision closed, the heavens were again opened unto us, and Moses appeared before us, and committed unto us the keys of the gathering of Israel from the 4 parts of the earth, and the leading of the 10 tribes from the land of the north. After this, Elias appeared, and committed the dispensation of the gospel of Abraham, saying that in us and our seed all generations after us should be blessed. After this vision had closed, another great and glorious vision burst upon us, for Elijah, the prophet, who was taken to heaven without tasting death, stood before us and said, Behold, the time has fully come, which was spoken by the mouth of Malachi, testifying that he, Elijah, should be sent before the great and dreadful day of the Lord come, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the children to the fathers, lest the whole earth be smitten with a curse. Therefore the keys of this dispensation are committed into your hands, and by this ye may know that the great and dreadful day of the Lord is near, even at the doors. If it is the key of seers, that is the key of translation, why is Joseph getting it 6 years after claiming to translate the Book of Mormon? In 1835, Joseph obtained the Egyptian papyri. Joseph called one roll the Book of Abraham, and the other the Book of Joseph. And it looks like we need to go to the next picture. Okay. This is the papyrus remains of what Joseph Smith called the Book of Abraham, of which he claimed the Book of Abraham text came from. This is the other papyrus fragment that Joseph Smith called the Book of Joseph. It was never translated. And let's go back to the introduction. These 2 papyri were given. I need to correct that here. Were given to the Utah Brighamite LDS Church on 27 November 1967. I'd show you the picture of the New York Times front page about Joseph Smith being a fraud translator, but Amazon would consider the picture's type font too small to approve this publication. I can actually show it to you here on the video because YouTube doesn't ban videos for having too small of a type font. So let me show you here real quick. Alright, here it is from back in the day. See the New York Times at the top, and you can see the facsimiles that are portrayed in here, and the New York Times had interviewed Egyptologists to see if Joseph Smith was correct, and the Egyptologists they interviewed said, no, we can't find Abraham anywhere in the text. And so the New York Times, of course, published it as Joseph Smith being a fraud. And so you got to understand the context. You can't just dismiss the article just because it goes against the church. So anyway, let's get back to the introduction. Alright, I have 5 minutes until my lunch is ready, so let's see if I can get this to the next stage before time runs out. As Mormons go to seminary, institute, and even missions, they are taught to memorize certain scriptures. One such scripture passage is in the book of Ezekiel. In Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 19, "Say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel his fellows, and will put them with him, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in mine hand." For those unfamiliar with what a stick is referring to, it is a book, but not in the binding this book will be in, or the digital format if you go to my website to pay less or get it for free. Sticks or tree branches or twigs were used to wrap papyri into what it was called a scroll. Curious that last days biblically prophesied Messiah referred to after this Ezekiel prophecy is called the branch by Isaiah and Jeremiah, and Ezekiel calls him a twig in chapter 17, verse 22. Now we come to the Book of Mormon and the brass plates. From 1 Nephi chapter 5, verses 10 through 16. "And after they had given thanks unto the God of Israel, my father Lehi took the records which were engraven upon the plates of brass, and he did search them from the beginning. And he beheld that they did contain the 5 books of Moses, which gave an account of the creation of the world, and also of Adam and Eve, who were our first parents, and also a record of the Jews from the beginning, even down to the commencement of the reign of Zedekiah king of Judah, and also the prophecies of the holy prophets, from the beginning even down to the commencement of the reign of Zedekiah, and also many prophecies which have been spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah. And it came to pass that my father Lehi also found upon the plates of brass a genealogy of his fathers, wherefore he knew that he was a descendant of Joseph, yea, even that Joseph who was the son of Jacob, who was sold into Egypt, and who was preserved by the hand of the Lord, that he might preserve his father Jacob, and all his household from perishing with famine. And they were also led out of captivity and out of the land of Egypt by that same God who had preserved them. And thus my father Lehi did discover the genealogy of his fathers, and Laban also was a descendant of Joseph, wherefore he and his fathers had kept the records." So, can Mormons guess the language of the stick of Joseph? From Mosiah chapter 1, verses 3 to 4. "And he also taught them concerning the records which were engraven on the plates of brass, saying, My sons, I would that ye should remember that were it not for these plates, which contain these records and these commandments, we must have suffered in ignorance, even at this present time, not knowing the mysteries of God. For it were not possible that our father Lehi could have remembered all these things to have taught them to his children, except it were for the help of these plates, for he having been taught in the language of the Egyptians. Therefore he could read these engravings and teach them to his children, that thereby they could teach them to their children, and so fulfilling the commandments of God, even down to this present time. This is why the emergence of the Egyptian papyri for Joseph Smith was so exciting, but he only managed to render a partial translation of the papyri he referred to, the papyrus, I'm running out of time here. Papyrus, he referred to as the Book of Abraham. Then he was murdered, and the papyri was thought to be destroyed in the Chicago fire. So one would think that with the return to the Brighamite branch of Joseph's original church, that David O. McKay, or Joseph Fielding Smith, or Harold B. Lee, or Spencer W. Kimball, or Ezra Taft Benson, or Howard W. Hunter, well, okay, maybe not Howard, or Gordon B. Hinckley, or Thomas S. Monson, or the current Russell M. Nelson would have translated the Book of Joseph Papyrus to fulfill the Ezekiel prophecy and prove to the world that God has chosen the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints through Brigham Young as his one true church, and with his seers and translators leading the membership down the covenant path back to God. In August 1992, my time is well past. You're going to have dead space here while I rush to pull my lunch out of the oven, and I'll finish up and get back to my lunch after this. So I can't pause, so sorry. Alrighty. In August 1992, Church President Benson's first presidency gave a statement on the King James Version of the Bible and wrote this: "Many versions of the Bible are available today. Unfortunately, no original manuscripts of any portion of the Bible are available for comparison to determine the most accurate version." And then President Nelson, as an apostle, said this from the 2007 October General Conference titled Scriptural Witnesses. "Today, saints living in many nations of the earth gratefully hold the Bible, the stick of Judah, and the Book of Mormon, the stick of Ephraim, bound as one in their hands." Then at the end of his 2017 October General Conference talk on the LDS website is the following. President Nelson's Book of Mormon lists: "The Book of Mormon fulfills biblical prophecies that the stick of Judah and the stick of Joseph will become one." I've not been able to find yet any other LDS prophet to refer to the Book of Mormon as the Book of Joseph through Ephraim, though the church's website is not very user-friendly. I'm pretty sure, though, that Nephi was a descendant of Joseph through Manasseh rather than Ephraim. But what do I know? I'm not a seer and translator, right? Well, anyway, that's the backstory of the church's position. Now it's time for my backstory. However, I'll list it out rather than write the narrative about it. Okay, so now I can get to my lunch, and then we'll get to my background. Okay, the highlighted listing of key events from my background. 1. Born and raised Mormon. 2. Asked mother about translation of Book of Abraham, but told it is higher learning when I get older. 3. At Institute in Canada, I received a copy of a document submission of John Gee's father to the LDS Church explaining the facsimiles. 4. My first ex gives me a birthday gift of teachings of Joseph Smith. So, I learned that of the King Follett sermon translation of Genesis 1:1 from the Biblical Hebrew. 5. In last winter semester for my bachelor's, Biblical Hebrew class becomes available by Walter Emanuel Aufrecht, who studied at Harvard under Thomas O. Lambden. February 1997, I decipher Paleo-Hebrew. 7. Farms tells me Joseph Smith is incorrect with translations. I humiliate John Tvetnes at his BYU lecture. I'm banned from Farms, but led to a BYU speech by Louis C. Zucker. He was of the University of Utah, professor there, about Joseph Smith being incorrect. 8. F. Michael Watson tells me my Paleo-Hebrew decipherment is wrong because he asked his friend at BYU. 9. F. Michael Watson orders my singles ward stake president and bishop to excommunicate me over my Paleo-Hebrew decipherment. Stake president finds out it was not an order by President Hinckley, and I was spared. Whew. 10. I obtained Gary Greenberg's 101 Myths of the Bible. 11. Supervisor of the LDS Church's curriculum department comes to my work at Beehive Clothing to request I become a church service missionary to help with altering footnotes of the scriptures. I was approved directly by President Hinckley because I was divorced. I was elevated to the top oversight committee. Farms and David Gaunt tried to get me terminated, but couldn't override President Hinckley's recommendation of me. I failed to get into the footnotes several key information, such as Ezekiel as to the explanation of why Sodom was destroyed. 12. I take all of Eva Vasilevska's Anthropology of Egypt and the Middle East classes at the University of Utah. I submit a paper about Egyptian document origins for Genesis, creation, and flood stories. 13. For the last 4 years, I've been trying to figure out publishing on Amazon, which cannot handle ancient fonts. Okay. Introduction for Brass Plates Translation. The Egyptian document that is here on the screen contains both hieroglyphic text with an accompanying glyph. Egyptologists, need to pluralize that, only translate the hieroglyphic text. Sir Alan Gardner's sign list and other sign lists do not contain any glyph signs, only hieroglyphic text signs. In this Egyptian Heliopolis creation glyph, there is understood multiple translations. Do I need to explain that Egyptologists only give one translation according to the text? I'll think about that. For example, there is an understanding of the deity family story of a father and his 2 children, but also it is understood as representing the creation of earth, and also understood as the inundation of the Nile River. I recognize the match between Genesis chapter 1 with this understanding of the creation of earth, which is confirmed in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, that the Torah author is using this glyph to write the Torah stories. To test this theory, I merely had to find an Egyptian document that would match a Torah story. And the theory has been confirmed over and over again with the identification that there is also Babylonian influencing on the biblical Hebrew text, which is understood since the biblical Hebrew text and the Septuagint Greek text were written after the Babylonian captivity of the Jews. What my confirmed theory also did was to eliminate the documentary hypothesis as a possibility for consideration. The documentary hypothesis being the belief that the original source documents for the biblical Hebrew text came from a Yahwist, Elohist, priestly, and Deuteronomic sources with a redactor. My theory is that the Torah stories came from Egyptian source documents mixed with Babylonian influencing, compiled into a narrative by a redactive author who would be a post-captivity Jew. In this work, I do not attempt to write out a scriptural narrative, especially in the style of King James English. Instead, I'll be showing each successive Egyptian glyph, including other Egyptian glyphs, not considered by the redacting Jewish author. And below, I'll explain the glyph in the context of the narrative translation. Because a glyph cannot be directly translated as with a text, but rather a glyph must be explained in its understanding, I am not technically giving a translation in the literal sense, but rather identifying the source document and giving an explanation, and where necessary, a correction of the Torah account to conform it to the source document. If this is confusing, it should make sense as I proceed. And yep, we're now on to scene 1. Okay, so there's the introduction for you guys.